Number 8. Gangneung Submarine Infiltration Incident. As a devastating famine clung on to North Korea during the mid-90s, ultimately killing hundreds of thousands of civilians, officials in Pyongyang started to grow increasingly paranoid that South Korea would exploit the North's weakened state. Because of this, North Korea stepped up its military spying activities. In September 1996, a North Korean Sang-O-class submarine dropped a 3-member special reconnaissance team off near Gyeongdong-jin on South Korea's east coast. The team was sent to spy on military activities and to help carry out the assassination of President Kim Young-sam. After one attempt at picking up the team members for the return voyage to North Korea failed, the sub came back the next night to try again. Unfortunately, it ran aground on a reef and its propeller jammed thanks to seaweed. The crew was unable to get the sub free, so the captain ordered everyone to abandon ship. They then set the inside of the submarine on fire, and the 24 crew members quickly dispersed in an attempt to avoid getting caught by the South Korean military. 42,000 troops were later mobilized in a massive 49-day manhunt, during which all but 2 of the commandos were either killed or discovered dead somewhere. One was captured and another was never actually found. It's believed that he either made it back to North Korea or died along the way. Some of the infiltrators were wearing fake South Korean-style military uniforms to try and blend in with other soldiers. Toward the end of the extensive manhunt, 2 of the final infiltrators were executed near the North Korean border. They were carrying rolls of film holding photos of military installations that they took during the search. At the time, the government had claimed the facilities were airtight. This was quickly proved false. The men had even written in their diaries about spending a night playing video games at a ski resort only 18 miles from their site the submarine had run aground. North Korea initially claimed that the sub experienced a power failure and coincidentally drifted into southern waters. A few months later, the country expressed its deep regret over the incident, which pushed tensions between the North and South to their breaking point. The next day, South Korea returned the cremated remains of the commandos who passed away. The destroyed Sang-O sub was eventually salvaged and put on display at Tonggil Park near Gwangyong, where it stands to this day. North Korea wasn't blamed entirely for the incident. The South Korean military came under criticism over the fact that the sub somehow landed without being detected, despite South Korea's heavily guarded coastline. People were also outraged by how the manhunt played out and the many civilian deaths that came along with it. Number 7. The Sunshine Policy. By the late 1990s, the economic disparity between South Korea and its struggling northern neighbor was glaringly obvious. During his time in power, the former South Korean President Kim Dae-jung implemented something called the Sunshine Policy. Formerly called the Comprehensive Engagement Policy, it aimed to restore communication and economic activity between the two divided countries. The approach was surprising, since it came at a time when many were calling for more harsh and restrictive policies against the North thanks to its antagonistic military activities and disturbing human rights violations. At times, these and other factors made it very difficult for the South to stick to the Sunshine Policy. Simply put, North Korea continued to do as they pleased, showing that they had no plans to concede in any ways that might actually improve its relationship with the South. The Sunshine Policy went back into effect in 1998 and ended just 1 decade later in 2008. Its first year proved to be one of the most challenging in terms of provocation from North Korea. A few particular incidents almost pushed the already strained relationship between the North and the South past its breaking point, including several naval skirmishes involving North Korean submarines that we'll be discussing soon. Number 6. 1998 Sokcho Submarine Incident. On June 22nd, a North Korean Yugo-class submarine got caught up in a fishing drift net in southern Korean waters about 11 miles off the city of Sokcho's coast and about 21 miles south of the country's border. A fishing crew found the vessel when they noticed members of the submarine crew trying to untangle their sub. The fishermen immediately notified the South Korean Navy, and a corvette was quickly dispatched to tow the submarine out to the port of Donghae, with its crew still inside. While being towed, the submarine sank. To this day, it's unclear whether the crew deliberately went down or if the vessel sank due to damage. In its announcement of the tragedy, North Korea's state-run news agency claimed that the sub was simply lost in a training accident. 3 days after the sinking, the South Korean Navy decided to raise the vessel. Inside, they located the deceased bodies of 9 North Korean sailors. 5 crewmen had been seemingly executed, while the other 4 had opted to take their own lives. The submarine held an array of military supplies including 2 automatic rifles, 2 machine guns, a shoulder-fired rocket launcher, hand grenades, diving equipment, oxygen tanks, and more. There were also taboo South Korean beverages on board, suggesting that the men had recently completed an espionage mission on dry land. According to the sub's logbook, it had infiltrated South Korean waters multiple times in the past. Despite growing frustrations with the North spying, South Korea reacted peacefully to the situation, and the bodies were returned without any fight. Still, during this time, the South was clinging to the hope that the Sunshine Policy would eventually pay off through an improved relationship with the North. Number 5. 1998 Yosu submersible incident. Late one night towards the end of December 1998, roughly 6 months after the Sokcho submarine incident, South Korean soldiers located a low-riding vessel about 2 miles from the city of Yosu. Harbor traffic was halted, while 2 Navy patrol boats were dispatched to search for the mysterious boat. Their efforts were initially fruitless, but the vessel was spotted again just a few hours later and was finally identified as a North Korean improved submersible infiltration landing craft, or an ISILC semi-submersible. In an article he wrote, Sebastian Roblin described the vehicle as a 43-foot-long, low-riding motorboat coated in anti-radar paint. It had the ability to submerge, concealing all but a small portion of the vessel under the water's surface. At 5:35 a.m., a South Korean boat fired warning shots while chasing after the ISILC 62 miles south of Jeoje Island. The North Koreans fired at the ships in a defensive response. 13 minutes after the first warning shots, the South Koreans shot and sank the semi-submersible. About an hour later, the Navy retrieved the body of a North Korean soldier. A little over a month after the skirmish, the sunken vessel was discovered at a depth of 500 feet below the sea. 2 days later, a body was found with a rifle and live ammunition inside the ship's stern. The sub was officially raised on March 1999, and 2 more bodies were located inside. Based on its size, investigators concluded that the ISILC was probably run by a 4-person crew and that all the crew's remains had been recovered. Not surprisingly, North Korea denied having any knowledge of the vessel and claimed that they certainly hadn't sent it to the area. In fact, their government issued a statement strongly implying that the South had somehow made the whole thing up to make them look bad. It also warned that North Korea could no longer be a passive onlooker while the South waged an anti-communist campaign against them. The Yosu skirmish fueled tensions between the North and the South and would eventually lead to an even bigger naval skirmish the next year. But the Sunshine Policy remained in place even as this situation escalated. In our current climate, what's your opinion of North Korea? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Number 4. The First Battle of Yeonpyeong. In 1999, North Korea started a campaign to redraw a set of maritime boundary called the Northern Limit Line. After the 1953 armistice that brought the North Korean War to a standstill, which is currently ongoing today, the North and South couldn't agree on a border in the Yellow Sea. Based on the North's belief of what belonged to it, the country decided to accuse the South of violating the sea boundary line by sending naval vessels into its neighbor's water. In reality, the ships had stayed on the south side of the NLL, but the North had no interest in actually recognizing this boundary. Over a week-long period in June of that year, North Korean ships crossed the NLL multiple times. When they refused to back down under the South's orders to retreat, the South Korean Navy resorted to using force by physically pushing the northern boats back across the boundary. The Northerners initially responded by trying to carry out their own bumping initiative, but they were swiftly outmaneuvered by the South, causing them to eventually retreat. They made another attempt just 2 days later, but they were once again outmaneuvered by the South Koreans. The engagement later escalated into gunfire, with the North firing first. Over the next 14 minutes, the South Koreans fired approximately 4,600 shots, sinking at least one torpedo boat and causing damage to several more. An estimated 17 to 13 North Koreans were killed in the skirmish. A handful of South Korean boats were damaged and 9 sailors were injured, but everyone on their side survived. The North Korean government declared victory, despite all the signs pointing to the opposite being true, and the fight gave rise to increased military tensions that continued for years, making an all-out war seem like an increasingly feasible prospect. Number 3. The Second Battle of Yeonpyeong. The dispute over the northern limit line didn't exactly end with the First Battle of Yeonpyeong. Back in 2002, almost 3 years after the first battle, a North Korean patrol boat crossed over the NLL and into South Korean waters. It was ordered to turn back, but was soon followed by a second North Korean vessel with no regard for the warnings. The pair of boats started harassing the 2 South Korean vessels that were chasing them. About 3 miles south of the NLL, the North Korean boats opened fire on their neighbors' boats, striking the wheelhouse of patrol boat PKM 357. A 10-minute skirmish ensued before South Korean reinforcement boats made it to the scene. It quickly became clear to the North Koreans that they were vastly outnumbered and outpowered, so they retreated back across the NLL. PKM 357 sank while being towed back to port. It was eventually raised and brought back to Pyeongtaek Naval Base, where it operates today as a naval museum open to the public. 13 North Koreans were killed in the fight and 25 were wounded in the Second Battle of Yeonpyeong, while 6 South Koreans were killed and 18 received injuries. South Korea demanded an apology, but the North didn't give in. They even blamed the South for the incident. After the battle, the South Korean military introduced increased security measures. It adopted a new policy of being able to shoot first at North Korean vessels that acted threatening in nature or crossed into their territory. Number 2. Further incidents. In November 2009, North Korean boats once again tested the South's patience by crossing over the northern limit line. After getting 2 verbal warnings and a warning shot for good measure, the North Koreans opened fire on a South Korean vessel. There was a short exchange of gunfire before the ships went their separate ways. No South Koreans died, while North Korean deaths were estimated between 1 and 10. North Korea accused the South of provoking the incident and asking the country to apologize, but this never happened. 1 year later, North Korea fired 170 artillery shells at the island of Yeonpyeong. Their intended target was a military garrison, but at least a dozen civilian homes were destroyed in the exchange. It was the first attack on a civilian site since the 1953 armistice brought a halt to the Korean War 57 years before. Once again, the skirmish was related to the disputed Yellow Sea maritime border called the Northern Limit Line and the North's attempt to assert territorial claims. 2 South Korean civilians and 1 military member were killed, while the casualties to the north were unclear. The South Korean military fell under criticism for being weak and ill-prepared, much like it had in the past after other incidents involving its neighbors. Following the attack, the country's defense minister resigned. Most civilians moved away from Yeonpyeong, and the military decided to increase its presence on the island. Number 1. The end of the Sunshine Policy. By 2006, many were questioning how South Korea could maintain the Sunshine Policy toward the North when it was abundantly clear that the North was not going to stop its military provocations, which included the development of nuclear weapons. As the South ran out of reasons to keep the policy, it suspended its aid shipments to the North but kept some parts of the policy intact. After becoming the new South Korean president in 2008, Lee Myung-bak took a more conservative and hardline stance to the North compared to past leaders. He refused to expand the economic interest at the Kaesong industrial region in North Korea, where South Korean businesses hired North Korean workers. He made it clear that the North had to work toward a resolution with the West over its nuclear ambitions if they wanted economic enrichment. That didn't happen, and by the end of the year, the Sunshine Policy was basically dead. It was declared a complete failure and officially cancelled 2 years later in 2010. A lot of things happened during the Sunshine period that could have pushed the North and South into a full-blown war, and not all of the incidents involved submarines. Most of the closest calls were through naval skirmishes and submarine-related events. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next time.